Hello, welcome back. Thank you so much. So if you could all please start returning to your seats. We have a phenomenal session coming up next, and I'm so grateful to my colleague Beverley Roy for joining us here today. The session is focused on living and working together, rapid and essential Anishinabek micro-credentials for employers of Manitoulin Island, so known as Mnidoo Mnising. And so with that, Beverley. Beverley is the president of the Kenjgewin tag, and I'm so grateful for you to take your time out and to share your experiences with us here. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I know I'm holding everyone hostage between now and lunch, so I'll keep that in mind as I share what I have this morning for you all. I'm also going to keep track of time, hopefully, and Michael will do the same, I believe. So I think together we'll make sure that everyone is fed in a timely manner. But I'm not sure if my slides are up there yet, but certainly, I would like to thank Robert and his team and all of the eCampus experts who have again invited us to be part of this wonderful forum. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to all the people online who are listening. It is great to have you with us as well. So if we can call up the slides, we can sort of start to begin. But as I was introduced, I was going to talk a little bit about what I wanted to share this morning. It's about living and working together and talking about how micro-credentials can support us in this work. So this morning, we've heard a lot about, I would say, global and even national strategies and work that's being talked about in terms of productivity. And certainly that stimulated a lot of reflection for me to think about in my work that I do as one of 9 Ontario Indigenous Institutes in Ontario. But what my talk today is about predominantly is really applying micro-credentials and how they can benefit the local level. So I'm going to share with you some of that work that we've been doing. It's just a couple of examples. It's not the entire body of work by any means. But I just want to kind of highlight a couple of things that we're doing that can support Ontario and even the sector and even at a local level, and you'll see that through the examples that I'm going to share. So I'm just going to share a quick little sentence or two about Indigenous Institutes and about us. I think you've heard a little bit about our sector from Robert this morning. You know, we do have great and tremendous opportunity in what we do, but you know, like everyone else in the sector, we do have our challenges, and of course, equitable funding is certainly one of those. But one of the things that I really wanted to share this morning, after listening to the wonderful speakers this morning, was really about, you know, how we're approaching labor market development and us as a sector and how we do that better. I think, you know, it was well said by one of the panelists, I can't remember exactly who, but, you know, within every crisis, there's opportunity. And I think this is where we find ourselves again. Ontario's Indigenous Institutes are part college, part university, part skilled trades, part high school, so we're kind of the whole gamut. And we're really just part of mobilizing a workforce that has been under-mobilized for many decades. So that's the work in the space that we're in. I'm going to share a little bit about what makes us a little different in terms of how we operate in the sector. So I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but in 2017, there was legislation called the Ontario Indigenous Institutes Act. And so we've had that legislation around for about, I guess it's now, what is that, 7, 8 years. And that is certainly supporting the work that we're doing. I think the other piece is that I would mention, even before 2017, all of us as Indigenous Institutes were doing our work probably decades before that. Some of us have been around for 30 years, and that's certainly the case for Kenjgewin. So we've been doing this work for a long time. And, it's the opportunities that I think every potential, I guess, perceived challenge in terms of labor market and workforce development, it always brings our work to the forefront as well. The other thing I would especially like to say is that Indigenous institutes are really grounded and rooted in their communities. And I think that's part of our governance structures and how we were created well before, like I said, 2017. So in that respect, we are able to respond rapidly and quickly to different needs in our communities and our surrounding area as well. I think in terms of what I do at Kenjgewin, I do have this continued growth and expansion vision for us and how we can contribute to Ontario's regional economy, and how we can apply those best practices and lessons learned for others to sort of, take under, to kind of observe and see how that might apply and work best for them. I want to take a quick second just to kind of remind and maybe share maybe something that not everyone might know. But, we've heard a lot today about, or this morning about, the labor market needs and expressions of those needs in manufacturing and design and all of those things. And I'm certainly supportive and I'm well aware that that is where definitely our economies are going. I think at the same time, I think it's good to remind our audience this morning that First Nations also have their own labor market needs and how micro-credentials can play a role in that space as well. So definitely we, as communities, we are well aware of what's happening regionally and nationally, but also there is a need for us to respond locally to those needs as well. And I think we've heard a little bit about that this morning, about how do we not talk so much theoretically about all the things that need to happen, but how it gets applied at the community level. So what I would like to share with you is that, part of what we do as Indigenous institutes is really we're supporting a workforce that is not only, for example, First Nation learners, but it also allows us to mobilize and support other employers who are in the same area. So part of that is, I think, where micro-credentials nicely fits in. I can't really see my slides on the prompter, but I can see them there. So you're gonna have to kind of help me along here, I think. Oh, it looks like we're gonna start at the beginning. But technology is one of those things that we have to roll with, when it happens, and I think this is one of those experiences. The other thing I would say about the labor market especially is that the data and the data sets are not always complete. So, when we're responding to local labor market needs, it really is us about being really, really connected to the places and spaces that we're in. And I'm not just referring to just First Nation communities themselves, but the geographical area that we're in. Many First Nation communities are located close to urban areas as well. And some of us are located in a little more rural area, which is our case, Manitoulin Island in Northern Ontario. I think part of the conversation is also about data sovereignty and how that could work, I guess, for us in terms of thinking about how labor market data may be applicable, I think, to the north, especially as it relates to First Nation communities and also, the industries that are located in the north. So I'm not able to show you right now, but there are some great projects out there, and I will mention one of our partners, Fleming College. If there's anyone out there from Fleming, they have undertaken the work to do Indigenous labor market, a database, I guess, for lack of a better description. But that is real-time labor market data. Oh, there it is. There, yay. So that is just an example of where, some data actually can be generated in terms of local needs and desires. Excuse me. I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk about, how micro-credentials can be applied at the local level. And I don't have time to go through all of the examples and the work that we're doing, but I just wanted to give a higher level overview of how micro-credentials can be applied in the work that we do as Indigenous institutes. And my colleagues from First Nations Technical Institute are also doing a wonderful presentation tomorrow, so you'll be able to hear a little bit more about that as well. But just to give an example, we are involved in healthcare and mobilizing and contributing to the needs of that particular sector as well in the north. But how micro-credentials fit in is that we can augment and supplement and upskill the knowledge that healthcare professionals already have and already working in terms of in their respective employers and whether it's for-profit or non-for-profit organizations. But what it really means is that we can add another lens of knowledge to the work that they're doing. So part of it is really thinking about, okay, so if you're in an area where, say, for example, there's a hospital and it's located in an urban center, but there's also surrounding Indigenous communities there's opportunity to build workforce development in terms of, I'm going to use this overrated word, cultural competency, in terms of how we build better and good relationships with one another in our application of micro-credentials. So that's an example, and I'll share a practical one in a few minutes here. The other one is about, specifically about First Nation government and employers. So again, in our communities, we do have different services, and again, that's where we can certainly step in and provide that role with developing micro-credentials in those areas as well. So I'll run through an example just in a short second here as well. We are also developing micro-credentials in early learning. Again, this is really about how do we augment the existing professional knowledge and practices of early learning educators. And again, for those centers or those places and spaces where children and Indigenous children may be attending, and to really augment the skills that existing ECEs may have already. I think the last piece is really about us as part of the education sector, and it really is about using micro-credentials for learner re-engagement. So again, it's really about addressing some of the policy, how would I say it, in a tactful kind of way, but we're addressing some of the colonial legacy policies of education. And so there's a lot of re-engagement that needs to happen in terms of our Indigenous learners and communities. So again, those are just like a broad overview of some of the sectors that we're involved in. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that we do respond to, of course, is our local labor market needs, and this is just an example of that. So this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't find in any of our labor market reports or any of those kinds of data, but this is just an example of how language has really been declared as an essential skill that our employees and our different organizations must have. So a lot of us as Indigenous institutes are involved in revitalizing our languages, and this is in direct response to our own governments and the employers who employ people within those organizations, and how language is a critical part of that service delivery. An example of that, of course, is something that we are working on is our Anishinabek one, which means the Ojibwe language. And so part of what we do have been doing is developing very introductory courses in language to sort of help workplace employers and employees develop some basic conversational skills and abilities in order to provide excellent service delivery to all of their customers, clients, whatever sort of industry they might be in. So again, that's just an example of how micro-credentials can be applied at a local level, depending on the needs of where you may be located. This next piece of information is really, I'm going to talk a little bit more about micro-credentials for a specific application, and that is employee onboarding. So as we all know, once you join an organization, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, part of that onboarding is really learning about the company, and it's all of the, the goals, values, and visions of that company. But also at the same time, it's really about, how do we make sure that good relationships are nurtured, and whether the reality is that First Nation communities, not only regionally, locally, and nationally, we really do want to be part of this national conversation that the current sort of, how would I say it, this whole conversation about tariffs and economic development have really pushed upon us. And we really do want to be part of that conversation in a meaningful way. And I think the opportunity, as someone had said earlier, is really before us, and how we're going to mobilize that and how we do that in a good way. But at what I would say is at the local level, this really becomes a way to start the conversations in a very safe and practical sort of manner. All of us, I would say, all of us as colleges and universities, you probably are good neighbors, I hope good neighbors, to your First Nation communities who may be located close by to you. So I think it's a really good example of how we can sort of onboard employees to know about some of the essentials of the area that you're working in, and I'll give you some practical examples of how we've done that. I'll give it a little bit of background or context about that piece, just because I think it's important. So a number of years ago, it was several nonprofit Indigenous organizations in our area, which is Mnidoo, Mnising. We got together and we really talked about how we really need to make sure that all of our employees have a common understanding of our own Anishinabek people in our nation and some of the current practices and protocols that happen in our area. And so that was an effort over several I think it might be years. I'm not sure if it was months, but I think it might have been years. But we ended up with a printed resource. And I think as the years progressed, we really thought about, can we do something better? And it's certainly needed. The idea and concept is there, but we really wanted to make it value added, as we've heard the term this morning. Micro-credentials can add that piece. So what we've done was we converted that resource into our micro-credential as an example, and it really does speak to our local area protocols of Anishinaabe practices, organizations, and really the essentials. It's not an in-depth conversation about cultural competency by any means. I think those conversations will still happen and those will still be undertaken by employers. But I think what we did was we really took a local context to it and really made it apply to the places and spaces that people were living and working in on a day-to-day basis. So we really took the theoretical and really brought it down to the actual employee level to know, what the local community was about. So I would say that, language and what we've called Kenjgewin, which is really about good relationships, that's the interpretation of this particular micro-credential that I'm sharing with you. It really is about nurturing good relationships within organizations as employers, but also good relationships, within community at that local level. I think part of what we've heard this morning is really about how we need to mobilize our workforce and start to think about things differently. And I really do think Indigenous institutes have a role to play in supporting and getting us there as well. The idea about good relationships, in our example, it's called Kenjgewin, and other nations will have their own language to describe that. But that really is part of how Canada is going to combat and tackle, these difficult conversations that are happening right now. Micro-credentials play a role in all of that, and I think it could be the starting point of mobilizing all of us to start new conversations together in how productivity, say for in the north, and we all know what happens in the north. There's no shortage of mining minerals and resources to be developed in Canada, in Ontario's north. And so I think it's really imperative upon us to really think about how good relationships are developed together so that it doesn't become another challenging conversation where First Nations are suddenly, going to be coming to the conversation at a non-opportune time. So I think that would be part of my main message to you today is that, Indigenous institutes, we are nimble, we're responsive, we're grounded in community, and so we're able to mobilize at that level. And I think the opportunity before us is great, and I think we have wonderful partners in the college and university sector to help us get there. I'm not saying we can do it by ourselves. We definitely need partnerships. So I think that's the message that I would share with you today. And I think my timer says I'm done, and Michael is saying that I am done too. So I think we're good I think this would be the good question part, I believe. So I'm going to stop there. So I'm open to having any questions come forth. And again, I don't want to stand between you and lunch, so we'll just keep that in mind.
A phenomenal session. Thank you so much. With the work that you and your colleagues are doing in terms of creating hello? All right. With the work that you and your colleagues are doing to create culturally relevant learning experiences for Indigenous and First Nations communities, what's the opportunity for collaboration that you see between some of the other universities in Ontario to help expand?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think the opportunities are really endless. I think part of what could happen and what should happen is, in terms of my passionate belief, is that Indigenous institutes need to be part of that conversation about cultural competency and how we can do that better with partners. I'm not saying that it's not being done well, it certainly is, but I think we can add a whole added layer of richness and diversity, I guess you might say. No, that's not the right word, but a whole added layer of knowledge once partnerships with Indigenous institutes can happen. I think that's my message to all of us in this sector, is that we are the third pillar, and we are waiting to be mobilized, and we want to be part of doing this good work. But I think it's a good conversation that we're having at this point in time. I forgot to mention during my sector highlights there, but one of the things that we also are doing is partnering, for example, with our local public hospital. So they are certainly interested in learning about, what I talked about there is the onboarding resource, because they certainly want their doctors and nurses to be, to have this local level of what I haven't found the right word yet but it's cultural competency at the local level. So they certainly embraced, all of the learning at the sort of historical and the facts and the history level, and they're aware of that. But now this resource is able to bring it down to the actual community level and to get to know, the people that they're providing services to. So that's just an example. But partnerships are key. I would say, Indigenous institutes are always open to partnerships, and that's the way we're all going to rise together in this work. Yes.
I'll hold it close, thank you. Beverley, thank you for a great presentation. I've heard you talk about this before, and I'm a real big fan of the work that you are doing there. And I see a lot of synergy with the previous panel on the economics of place and what that means to the local resilience, as you put it. And can you talk a little bit more about what work, if any, or what work is to be done about employers, so any employers who are sending their employees to understand more about Anishinabek culture and how they can learn, in your hospital example, for example, like, are there other employers that are doing that?
I can only kind of mention what's happening in our area. I think there are probably good examples of that happening in other local communities as well. But I think this is catching on, definitely. I would say that I didn't actually get to mention it as well, but we're seeing some great interest from policing services and public safety. So again, when we have, in this case, several public service type of organizations where there's a population of, First Nation and non-First Nation community members and communities, it becomes imperative that we talk about how we bridge these conversations and develop these good relationships amongst one another. I think that's the exciting piece ahead, is that micro-credentials are going to allow us to do more of this work. I think it's key in terms of developing good connections, good relationships with one another in order to get to the conversation about how do we prosper together, and how does resource development, how does all of these other things start to fall into place once we have established good relationships with one another. So I don't want to stand anymore between people in their lunch break. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And with that, we are breaking for lunch at this point. Thank you so much for your engagement through this morning's sessions. We'll be back again at 1:30 to kick off the afternoon's program, where we'll have obviously a session in this main room, which all our online friends will be here with me, and we'll also have a session in the Beaton Hall room on the ground level. So thank you very much for your engagement. Just as a reminder, photo booth in the hall. Go be cool, do things with the photo booth. And we have a networking event as well at 5 p.m., which I failed to mention earlier. But at the end of today's session, please ensure that you're still able to collaborate with your colleagues. Thank you very much.